Thanks for having me here. I'm really excited to be here today to spend an hour or so talking and share my perspective, which is my main sharing of what I want to do today is share my perspective of what I've done with my life and the level of risk. So much I've learned through my childhood, which I've lived kind of a unique childhood with epilepsy, which has been kind of from 5 years old till about 13. And it was, of course, one of those unexpected journeys that 20 years later, I realized kind of the tools it gave me. And the way I say that is I gained a different perspective. I owe this a lot to my mom, my dad, for putting in front of me different options. And those were things that more were about exercising the mind, trying to fight epilepsy, which is a joining of both sides of the brain together, firing seizures. So in the beginning of that journey, I did a lot of mental drawings, little different doctors of putting puzzles together, trying to use a focus. And what it came down to was actually a food diet and snowboarding, which I owe a lot to my healing of epilepsy. This took about 3 years of a certain kind of diet. And snowboarding, I kind of use that word as a healing tool for me because it was a big focus for me. It's something I felt like I was grounded in the world. And this is in the mid-'80s. And I don't know if you know a lot about snowboarding in the 80s and into the 90s, it was not a welcome sport. And so that was kind of, in a way, a perfect fit because I didn't fit in anyway in school. And so my journey with all this, again, kind of what I owe to my parents is the okay of being different. And those things is the things I've learned 20 years later on why my career in snowboarding went the way it did and why I did the things that I do now, which is a lot about just feeling in action, doing things, seeing where it goes, what resonates inside to self-growth. And in snowboarding, it kind of put me in a spot where I kind of followed for a while the World Tour, the World Cup, did the competition. We were all kind of developing the sport together, so we kind of shaped how things were run. But after about 20 years later, I realized I was kind of growing out of the competition scene. And with my childhood of just trying to take on different things, different ways, I saw a different perspective in snowboarding that wasn't developed yet. I was photographed a lot in snowboarding. I had a lot of ideas at the same time how to be photographed. Working with two different minds to create an image can be very challenging sometimes, especially when you're the one on risk with your life and feeling the power of passion for what you're actually doing. And so I've slowly started to develop these different parts of cameras, joining. I hired someone to do some soldering for some wires, and I've started taking self-portraits. This is in the late 90s, and I realized this was a huge room, a space to figure out what else could come to. And at the time, my career, I was getting at an age where snowboarding didn't really want to sponsor someone in their mid-20s to compete because the 19, 15-year-old is going to beat me out. So it was up to me, if I wanted to stay in snowboarding, to recreate myself, reinvent who I was in the sport. And so the self-portrait world became my focus and gave me a whole nother 15 years of as a career. I'm 45 years old now. I still have sponsors as a snowboarding professional, and it's really based on creativity. And that space of creativity has changed over the 15 years I've been doing self-portraits. A lot because of technology has come into the game in different ways. Back when I started out, about a 40-pound backpack, you'd have to hike everything twice to get the shot, because you'd hike, set the camera up, and then ride and go back and get your camera. So one photo could take weeks. Now we have GoPro cameras, different smaller cameras that you can do something very quick. And when that happened, I realized I want to keep progressing with self-portraits. And so I worked with a paraglider. I bought a motorized paraglider and wanting to capture something that was storming up in my mind of different perspective. And it wasn't until 10 years later after that that I actually got to do another image that brought something new to me, which was kind of following like a bird, which is now the drone world. And I wanted to show a little bit of a little 1-minute video of my first 10 years of shooting self-portraits. And this is mostly, well, this is all with a SLR, about a 15-pound camera. And enjoy this for a minute. Winter we've had for the 9 years I lived there. It's a lot of fun. But after the winter, I was kind of like, I want to really capture what I'm seeing in snowboarding, what I'm feeling. So I went and spent $600 on remotes. I didn't know a lot about photography, but I had this first photo I wanted to capture. It took me actually about 5 weeks to do it. I ended up failing and trying it again, really wanting to capture what snowboarding was to me on film, and so the sake I could actually share it with my family and the industry, and that's how I started taking self-portraits. The helicopter drop. It was a couple-year project of where I wanted to really capture a photo that looked impossible. The whole idea was to shoot the shot and not have the helicopter in the frame. And so it needed to be big, and Alaska was the best spot to do it. I drove all the way up there pretty much just to do that. So once I left the helicopter, I realized I'm never going to experience this again. You know, it's like that in between a flying squirrel and dropping a cliff. But after a couple people saw the photo afterwards, I started to realize maybe snowboarding isn't ready for this, or it's not really snowboarding. I'm on a snowboard, but it was more on the artistic side of just wanting to create something different, unique. And so that's how it got shaped. It turned out great. I was stoked. Unfortunately, no one really ran it the way I wanted to, but oh well, I got it on my wall. So that's the first 10 years of my self-portrait career. And one of the biggest things I wanted to share about it as well is the challenge to make a company invest in me. It's a never-ending story. Even after 15 years of shooting self-portraits, I came to one of my sponsors at the time, which was GoPro, and said, I got an idea I want to do. I want to ride with a drone and release it halfway down the mountain. And it took me 6 months to convince them. I didn't actually convince them, I forced them in a way, which I've learned to use the media, how to leak stuff out and put people in the spot that they feel like they should invest. And this was one of them, which was pretty interesting. It worked out. They actually made a worldwide TV commercial out of it. But again, it's one of that hard things as an individual to come to a huge company and say, this is my idea. I don't know how it's going to turn out, but just, can you believe in me? And that's been probably the hardest thing to pay the way in snowboarding for a 45-year-old athlete to continue in the industry. And the level of risk is kind of what I mentioned earlier, which a lot of the reason why this worked was I was kind of the only one who was willing to risk $5,000 in camera equipment in the air. I had the athletic ability to ride, but it was also really about two things coming together that no one else was willing to do. And I lean on that a lot because that's kind of how I see a lot of things happen in my life. Even today, my lifestyle, living off the grid, which I do, is a collision of what I can have access to and what I personally want to do with my life. So there's the TV commercial I wanted to show you as well, this releasing moment of a camera, which is one of the reasons I bought that motorized paraglider. I wanted to capture this moving out of the perspective of the body. And so here we are, a good 12 years later on making that actually a reality for me, which has been very fun. Here it is on YouTube. Wherever the home is, you can't get homesick. It's really that simple. So that was another project that took a lot of fighting to do, which I don't know if it's interesting at all, but it was a very big moment for me in my photography and content world. It is kind of what my job is these days. I come up creative ideas, try to figure out how to do something new and supply it to a company to market it or create new devices that kind of fit that idea better. And there's one other one that I think I would like to show you that I think you would actually have seen it here, because what I've been told, this device, GoPro and Google brought to market a few years after this. So please share your thoughts.
At any moment when you're riding, you just freeze the moment and move around anywhere you want to go. Continue, stop. The objects of these cameras mounted in the way I did was just giving you the freedom to edit at any angle. Built some plywood, little handle. I got 13 cameras, which once you get them all recording, there's no way to register them all, which the way I did it was pretty old school, just to build a time card. And this one's round. Once you get it going, the recording, move it at the same time, that's your registration point. Same time, so you can go 2 minutes and 3 seconds on each shot and find the same moment and move around. And then continue with one going a certain way, stop, go around, and just to share more of the 360-degree feeling that you get when you're snowboarding or doing anything. Just the eyes are such a beautiful tool to receive stuff.
So that's kind of where I'm standing with my career as far as a photographer and an athlete. And I've recently have brought in my lifetime passion of working with my hands, woodworking, and trying to value life. That's one of the main things I'm trying to learn how to do every day by getting my hands dirty, kind of trying to learn the things that I use in my life and try to do it myself. So I've chosen to live off the grid. I live in a 300 square foot cabin on 40 acres off about 3 miles off any power grid. And I've been learning the way of raising my consciousness on how I move in the world and what I use. And I wanted to share a different perspective that isn't exactly pretty. The more I know, the harder it gets. And I know you guys are here a lot to supply information. And it's interesting to strive to know more, to want to have a closer connection to the world of what happens. And that's my continuous goal. And I'm kind of wanting also to have a conversation with y'all on how to manage, how to balance information. Because I've gone in waves of having too much, not knowing what to do with it, because I feel responsible for what I'm learning. And that's something that I've tried to figure out how to teach. I've taught at some schools. And the best I can know to do with all this information is to do it in action. And then once you put something into action, you have another feeling that can overtake the mind of just information. And that has to do a lot with the heart. Whatever gets resonated in you, not everything does that I do, so I don't have a strong connection with it. And I'll move on to something that is. And what I've learned, why that is, at least my perspective, is that we're all born with something first. The first organ that's formed is the heart. That's kind of what takes place. It's our main seed. And that was the one thing that I keep going back to for all my answers that I can't answer. And that's the one thing somewhere in me is knowing what to do with it, and back to resonating by doing something in action. And I'd love to talk to you all about what resonates. I know snowboarding has for me living off the grid, being closer to the indigenous needs of what we need to live life. I don't expect myself or everyone to do everything that we need to do, because that's the beauty of working together to do something. And I mean that in a way where I've learned to hike my water miles just to brush my teeth. And you can imagine if you do that, you have some sort of exhilaration, like you just ran a marathon. And all you have to do is brush your teeth to feel that. And that is simply being more connected with what we do, what we use. And again, it's the same for everybody. It's really what resonates in the heart, because that's kind of, really, that's all we have to lean back on. At least that's my perspective. And so I wanted to show another video of my other part of my life outside of the snowboard career, of where my heart resonates the most and what that looks like over, it's been about 15 years now, putting that more and more to action. It wasn't until I was 33 that I finally felt it was time to bring this childhood dream to life of building my own house with my own two hands. Came across these beautiful 40 acres in Donner Summit. When I first saw it, I was like, this is the beginning of my dream.
It's buried.
Which that winter was a huge winter in the snow. I got to experience the place with a teepee and get a feeling for the area. And finishing my winter off in Alaska, I was like, what kind of shape does this house that I'm gonna build, this dream, what kind of shape does it have? And with most things, you gotta really let go of all your ideas. Close your eyes and what's this really about?
And I started to realize it was about me, my heart. It's like, where does this experience of feeling most alive, where does this live? I started to realize this was standing on a mountain peak. This is where, in the past 33 years, this is where I've felt most alive. And I started looking at all these photos. I'm like, wow, there's a shape to this feeling. Standing on a mountain peak and reaching out to the world. This is the start of an idea, like off a feeling. And I think everyone can relate to this feeling. This is where you're high on life and feel most alive. Like, everyone has that certain structure, just reaching out. As well, keeping your feet grounded. And from there on, it just started to take shape. I'm like, oh, I gotta draw this down. And as soon as I knew it, I was experiencing something that's been experienced for hundreds and hundreds of years. You see this drawing of a star connecting all your dots on your body. And if you connect them the other way, it becomes a pentagon. So I think if you go off an instinct or you go off the golden ratio, you're gonna end up with the same thing. Of course, you have to really let go and listen to that heartbeat. Go, where is that heartbeat feel most alive? For me, it was standing on the mountain, where I realized that's what I want my house to be, because that's where I felt most alive. The great thing about taking on a project in this way is that everything naturally happens afterwards. Where your feet are is where the front door should be. Where your arms reaching out is where your windows should be. The hardest part has been dealing with the weather. It's mixing cement in the snow. But it's really what I wanted, is to put myself in a place that I got back to the basics of simple living. Living off the grid has been something that's always wanted to do. And looking around with what I had to work with was, I had a lot of rocks. It's what really survived up here. And so my house became built out of rock. I had no idea it was gonna take me 4 years to build my house. But it was one of those projects that, again, it's a way for me to find out and express who I was.
So that was my project of finding my place in the world. And what I've learned, which the biggest part I learned about that project, was time. Imagine being by yourself in the woods. You work with time, especially when it's snowing. And I realized that's a lot to do with motion. And back onto the golden ratio, I don't know if you know a lot about the golden ratio, but it's the basics of quantum physics. How we all built, everything else is kind of built under that, unless you go outside of that equation, which we all do. But what I truly, back to the heart, has a natural instinct that is based on the golden ratio, that I feel like is a great balance to find out the stuff I'm struggling with, as I was sharing, like Sometimes there's too much, sometimes there's too little. And those are kind of, I think, has a lot to do with being too much in the past, too much in the future, or too much in the present. And so what I've learned back into the golden ratio is to find things in thirds. You have the past, present, the future. You know, the future we don't know. We have a way of shaping that together. The past has already happened, so we know what has been. And the present is of right now. The simpleness of doing something that will no longer be this moment. We can record it, pass it on, which becomes the past. And so that is a way that I've learned to stay in balance, to stay in health, and to continue to trust the instinct. Because as I get older, I have more layers, have more experiences, more things to fight through to figure out what is actually happening in here. And every time I talk to someone that they don't know what they're doing or what to do, I go back to your childhood when you had less layers. It's much more clear, it's much more simple, and it's most of the time very true. Whatever you were dreaming as a child, there's something in there that is wanting to do that. And that's my perspective today of wanting to bring to you of don't forget about the child in you, because it's very important. It has an important message and something very important to share. So thank you for having me today. And if anyone has any questions about anything, please, I'm here, and I brought some books of my self-portrait career as well that has some other images in it that have uniqueness to it. Yes?
I would like to ask about the time you spent in the house. Do you have other people around, or don't you miss connection with your friends? Or I mean, you probably have a good connection with, let's say, nature, but I would miss the daily contact with people.
Yeah, it's different. I have a different connection with people now. I have, in a way, the same amount of people visiting me that I did when I was in the suburbs. I lived in a huge house before this, and people seem always excited to do something a little unique. And so I get people wanting to do something off the beaten trail, snowshoe up or mountain bike up, and it becomes more unique of a connection, which I found some of the space, because it's very quiet, it's very holding of the space together, and a lot of times what they experience to get to the place woken them up in a certain way that they're ready for a certain experience of conversation or sharing.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, what are you planning in the next 10 years or 20 years? Do you plan to keep on snowboarding and photographing yourself, or photographing other riders, or where do you see yourself?
It's a great question. I truly don't have the true answer to that. I do love photography. I think in a way it will be a combination of more my building world and sharing that maybe with younger crowds. I'm about to be a father, and so my excitement to share is accelerating, as the day goes by, to get ready for that. And however may be able, like, content's a great way to share information, but I've learned giving talks is something I enjoy and seem to have a closer connection of understanding to how to talk to someone versus making a video. So I'd say more talks like this.
So living off the grid and living in the woods as such, you might have encountered several situations where the things are very extreme in terms of nature or wildlife or anything. Any interesting experience that you had, like where you felt you've not been prepared for what you were encountering at that time? That you can share?
Yes, many things I realized I wasn't prepared. I live off the grid enough where I can hike back to civilization within a day. And so that's my security of not doing something right. But I've learned a lot about how to shop, because everything I do I have to get rid of. You know, my trash, human waste, just everything you have to deal with, carry water. Water freezing is a huge task where I'm at, because there's a lot of rocks, so I can't bury water below freezing very easily. When I do, it's very limited water amount. And so I've become a great appreciation of water, and working with the temperatures. I welded a lot, and that was actually like a saver of welding to keep my hands warm while I was out in the snow.
You've also mentioned at some point risk and taking it and handling it. You've obviously done lots of things that for most of us feel very risky, right? How have you balanced taking risks and living to be here giving this talk today?
The level of risk I've managed with what I know, and also what I don't know. I don't have all the equations figured out before something happens. And so that's a level of risk of what I'm willing to do, the one I'm willing to take. A lot of them I try not to do where my life is threatened, but snowboarding has taught me how to perform under pressure, because life's on the line. If you screw up, you can get seriously hurt or die. And to do that at a multifunction of shooting remotes at the same time, I've developed awareness of different things. So if I'm building my cabin out in the woods on a ladder, I can feel the space. I feel a lot better, and I can manage my ability of what I'm doing. The level of risk that I enjoy taking is being vulnerable, crossing the threshold of discomfort. And I do that with athletic ability, but I like also doing that in a way of just taking on something I don't know. And I did that my whole life. That's how I learned how to do things in the world. I never went to college. I own a snowboard outerwear company in Japan. I've dealt with all my contracts in snowboarding, never had an agent. And so I've just taken on things where the level of risk feels high, but I'm willing to fail. And that's one of my key understandings on risk. If you're willing to fail, you can always gain something from it. Because I've failed many times, I always do. It's something that I'm expected to do. And that, people forget that, I realize, especially when I get someone coming wanting to build a tiny home. They have these prints of all these plans they've been planning out for years, and they've never picked up a hammer yet because they're scared something's gonna go wrong. And I try to encourage people the level of risk of it being known as failure. It's kind of like, give it a shot. If you need to do it on a small level, do that, and just learn from the failing process, because those have the answers. And it's not going to be an answer that you're looking for. It's going to be something kind of that you're not expecting.
I wanted to ask about the moment when you jumped out of the helicopter. What did you think in that moment? More concerned about the jump itself, or maybe about the picture, or what was the main?
Yeah, that photo of the helicopter was a unique one for me. My biggest issue at the moment before I jumped was the down pressure of the blades of the helicopter. So I actually got going faster than gravity. I could barely lift my board off the skid. I just kind of slid off. And around that time, I totally forgot about the remote, that I was shooting photos. And there's a certain process when that's happened, because when I grab my snowboard, the other hand naturally wants to do the same. And so I had no idea if I took the photo, because this is back in the slide film days. So I just knew the camera took the whole roll. And I was lucky enough to get a photo of it, because I put myself in a position where I didn't want the pressure from other film and photographers. So I was the only one there taking a photo. And it became larger than I thought it would be. But in the perspective of being on the top, looking down, it was something I felt. I waited a while until I felt that zone of clarity, this is what I want to do, and I see it, it's going to happen, and here I go.
So in a way, you've been a pioneer of kind of marrying the sport and a photography that you did, right, when you started. So do you see in a sport some sort of unexplored territory that not a lot of riders are looking into? In a way, you were 25 or 30, right, and you started doing this personal photography. What is kind of the creative unexplored territory today that you would have done if you had to be like completely creative, invent something new?
I think the key element to that is knowing less. I was able to shoot cameras in a way because I didn't know anything about them. And so I kind of twisted the rules a little bit because I wasn't taught. I just kind of took it in a raw space. And so I think it's important to learn about things. And what I've learned, if you're going to learn about something and want to be in a new space with it, creative-wise and innovative-wise, is to go back to that discomfort, crossing the threshold, letting go of everything you know, and just kind of like take a risk on putting something together that has a lot to do with timing and where technology is at the moment. Because what's happened with me is technology met some ideas. Some took 10 years, some took weeks, but they all kind of were a moment in time that wasn't together yet. And I look outside of snowboarding a lot, outside of photography a lot, at different technologies. You know, the drone world, as soon as I saw something happen, I realized I don't need a paraglider anymore. You know, I don't know how a camera's gonna mount on a drone yet because they're too heavy, but 4 or 5 years later, you know, it finally happened. And so that's kind of in a simple way of a different equation from different industries coming together to do something together.
I guess I have a few more questions as well. So one of the questions is, we're Google. I work for YouTube. I'm an engineer on YouTube. What's going on with your YouTube channel right now?
Not much. For some reason, I don't spend a lot of time on my YouTube channel. I don't know if it's because I'm unfamiliar with it. Mm-hmm. I probably blame some of that on the edits that come out. I've handed over the footage to someone else, and they keep their edits on their YouTube channels. And so that is, that's kind of what I've learned a little bit in my photography. I've sat down and edited my own things, but I have more coverage, more marketability if I hand it over to somebody and they can do something else with it. And so I don't have a lot of control over all the videos to put on my YouTube is one part.
Do you edit all of your own content as well?
I do on some level. I used to do it a lot, but it's the quality, everything. I'm on the road so much, I can only do so much with my laptop, and everything else is too much for me to handle, so I usually just hand things off because I'm bouncing around a lot.
Yeah, that's the easy way to do it. What awesome technologies are you kind of looking for, like that you've seen in the news or that you've seen other companies working on that you're really excited about that might influence your work?
I'm not totally pinpointed on like the circle camera. I've seen that get innovated into a little ball now. Yep. You know, so I'm kind of curious on where that perspective goes. Sometimes I worry that it's getting farther and farther away from us learning how to feel the experience, that there's a bigger gap in the actual action part of the self doing it. And so that's one thing that, you know, when you look at a screen, I get a little worried if the kids watching this, if they're going to actually go do it, or if that's just enough.
Yeah.
Because technology-wise, it's becoming more and more real, like that you're actually there. And that's making, I think, the younger generation just, that's cool, that's it. Yeah. You know, they don't have the desire to go do it. And so I'm hoping somewhere in the mix of technology in the days to come that it'll bring us into more of a feeling it ourselves.
Do you kind of like look at VR as an extension of that, so it'll make kids passive and accepting of, oh, I did it in VR, so I don't need to do it in the real life?
No, I don't. What I do see it doing is being a teaching. If somebody wants to learn how to do a trick, I think it could help them visualize what it is to do like a double backflip. So they get to see something. But the simpleness of just, say, snowboarding, just going down a hill, I think does the opposite. It brings a person farther away from doing the sport. And I've learned, my niece actually has scoliosis, and she's doing some major exercises that are very painful. And the VR has actually been very pain relieving because it makes your mind, you know, disconnect from your body on some level because you're in this other world, of course.
Right.
That's kind of like the idea. So I see a huge outlet for people to be released from struggles or just taking a break from life or getting through a certain exercise and getting progressive with.
So what happens if you were to use VR when you're living off the grid?
Oh, you know,
like
I had someone
kind of-
come out and we filmed the full VR video. And for me, it's a little, it's hard because I'm there all the time. Then I watch something and it's different.
Yeah.
You know, you feel like you didn't get to tell the whole story that you wanted to tell. And this has happened in my whole career. You know, people take their own stories on when they see a certain image or video. And the VR, I think, is it's a 3-dimension. You know, like gives you like something to back to losing yourself. You know, which I think is a plus, but too much, I wonder. Like it's less being in the world. In some ways, we're creating a world. So I kind of, I don't know. I challenge you on where we're going to go with that, because in some ways, I mean, we're all responsible for what happens. You know, each generation is born into groundwork, and so the next generation is going to think VR is just the standard. You know, which it probably will become the standard. But no one's really, as generation comes on, they never ask, like, could we do it different? It's just kind of like, it's already set. You can progress with it, but maybe there's a moment where someone should have said, no, if you're gonna do this, you need to at least go outside and stick your hands in the dirt for 5 minutes. Just remember that you're here.
Switching gears, I wanted to ask about this. So you didn't go over this at all, but you built your own ski lift. Right, like on your property, out in the middle of nowhere, with your hands. Like, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that pushed my engineering ability a lot. I came across this old chairlift from Sweden. It was in pieces, and I had a tow rope for years at my property. So I was like, oh, this is perfect to get off the ground and have to bury anything. And it wasn't so much of something I had a long-term goal of, but I love progressing. You know, just my mind is always busy, so I'm trying to find a place to put it to action. So this was something that got me an understanding of how the engineering of physics work, because I'm not very good at schooling. I'm just great on hands, you know. And back to like, I was willing to take the risk of whatever this was going to be, and I learned a lot. You know, it's fascinating engineering of what happens on a chairlift. It's like 300 pounds becomes 12,000 pounds within seconds. You know?
You were never worried that you were gonna fall off or it was gonna break, or?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
There's.
I guess the drop was less than the 30 meters from the helicopter.
It was rock, so it's a little harder. But I had a bunch of friends help out, and some never came back. Some stuck through the whole process. It took about 8 months, and I didn't have any fancy equipment, so a lot of cowboy just putting ropes up to trees with winches, because we, you know, lifted 6 towers, and drawing a straight line in midair up the mountain is pretty challenging to figure out how to do that.
Right.
So it was fun working with old school equipment and figuring that all out.
I'm kind of curious about like your shopping habits. This is a weird question, but so you said you think a lot about what you're going to buy before you bring it back home, because there's effort involved in both bringing it there and taking the rubbish away. Yeah.
I've learned, you know, paper. I have fire as my hot water heating source, so anything I could burn, I burn it. You know, I've learned the amount of fuel to recycle certain things. It's better just to burn it. So I don't burn everything. You know, there's some things I come back and recycle when I can in town. But it's a lot to do with the weight. Sometimes I'm hiking the whole hike up. I have a snowmobile or a snowcat, so depending on the snow conditions, I can drive a snowcat to my door. I mean, it takes a half hour. But if I don't have that option, which the weather always kind of predicts whether I can do that or not, so I try just to plan light, kind of like you're camping in some form.
Yeah.
Efficient, smart, Don't over shop for wasting stuff.
So sustainability is a big aspect of most of your shopping trips.
Yeah. And it's also vegetables last longer in meat in certain temperatures. So I'm like, okay, I'm a vegetarian for the next 4 months. So try to move around, and I travel a lot, so I'm like moving. I'm trying to be okay with the traveling too. It's like back to like knowing more. It's hard to figure out where to place yourself, and I'm learning as we go and trying to be all with that.
Yeah, that's cool. If anybody else has questions, always feel free, right?
We have questions on the dory.
Oh, there's a dory.
Is there an impossible shot that was actually impossible and was given up? If so, any plans to get that sooner with better technology now?
Ought to do something better. I must say my brain has slowed down after so many years of taking still portraits. But there's follow cam. Like I love working with pilots, for drone pilots, and one of the fascinating parts about drones, I guess it's not exactly about the photography part, but I can put on VR goggles and I can watch the drone go down my line, say in Alaska, because a lot of times you can't see where you're going down. It's so steep.
Yeah.
And there might be 3 chutes, 2 of them cliff out, the other one you're supposed to go down, but it all looks different when you get to the top. And so I feel like that would advance photography in the athlete, because they're more confident, they can perform better, and you'll end up with something more technical as a shot, which can bring more beauty or new space to work with.
So not only advances the shot, but just your ability to go down a mountain.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I would love to be able to make a drone go away from me and come back as I'm moving down the mountain. If I can be that close to something. So far, I just know one pilot that's willing to do it with me. But it's the part of like, that's kind of what happens when you're snowboarding. You're very in your space, but then you're also going back to looking like 100 feet ahead of you. So your mind's going in and out of your body in some ways, just to be aware. And so if you can make a camera do that, I feel that would be another space to work with.
What was your most terrifying line that you've ran?
There's one actually, it was a remote, and the hill slid. And I remember being on top of a double cliff, and I went off the first cliff, it was in the avalanche, and I couldn't see. But I remember halfway in the air, like, if I stay in this position, I'm gonna land on my back on the rock. That was my most odds. And last second, I rotated as much as I could, and I hit my hip on the rock instead of directly in the back. Put me out for months. But that was kind of my scariest moment, of like the moment of like thinking that something's going to happen to me permanently, and having a quick response, or the best I could.
Yeah, spider sense. Do we have anything else on the dory? Sorry.
Yeah, one more actually. Also from Winston, you have a big fan here. What do you think about those full-time Instagram snowboarders? And he gives an example, Jerome Tannen, The Eternal Beauty of Snowboarding. There's a YouTube link, but I don't think we can play it in the... So it's basically, what do you think about those full-time Instagram snowboarders?
Well, I think...
More details.
Yeah. Well, I'll grab onto some ideas here of what I've learned in snowboarding, say on the athlete side, is snowboarding progressed so much with what people are doing in competitions and the latest videos, that it's so much that the consumer actually doesn't want to be the person anymore. It looks too hard. It looks out of reach. And so what I've learned, sharing like more of a lifestyle, whatever that is, mine's off the grid, people feel more connected. It just feels more real backyard feeling. And so I feel like there's a more marketing tool within that. And in snowboarding, it hasn't always been there. It's been actually very challenging to beat the 18-year-old out of the seat to be in the market seat. But I feel like that's actually what's naturally happening now. Just people are, they watch the Olympics, and it's cool to watch. It's awesome, but a lot of people like, no, I just want to go have fun, and that's kind of the basics of why a lot of us got into snowboarding, was just for pure fun. And there's the competitive side, and it's progressed a lot, but the heart of just pure fun is, I think, the main seed of snowboarding.
Yeah, I agree with that. We're gonna hear the music soon. So, anyways, I want to thank you for coming and talking with us today. It's been awesome to hear your life and experiences.
Yeah,
Cheers.
thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Thank you for your time.
Cool.
Thank you.